We're going to continue with reviewing from Module 6. If you'll look at your meiosis vocabulary and pictures, I've already got the answers here for you because I think it's better to look at the explanation as we look at the pictures, which has the exact same words in it. So if you'll pause and correct your answers and then scroll back down to the bottom slide, second slide, and we'll go over those. If we look at the second screen, or the second slide, excuse me, on the screen, you'll see I've tried to put, I'm not sure where that one's coming from, but I've tried to put the words in the correct spot, except for that one. Let's see if I can move that up here. And I'm going to try to use this to explain what's going on as well as the vocabulary that you had the answers to on the previous slide. In the second part of this module, we're talking about a process called meiosis. And unlike mitosis, where we start out with a cell and end up with two identical cells, meiosis is where we start out with a cell and we end up with 4 haploid cells, or cells that have half the number of chromosomes. And this is important because it forms the gametes. Remember, the gametes are the collective term for the egg and the sperm, which are the reproductive cells, and that they join during the process of fertilization and form the new individual, which is called the zygote, in the process of sexual reproduction. So this is where DNA comes from 2 different parents. And this is in contrast to asexual reproduction, where only one parent contributes the DNA. And that's basically what mitosis is a part of. And there's different types of asexual reproduction. There's fragmentation. So like if a flatworm gets cut in half, each of its parts can actually grow into a new flatworm. There's vegetative propagation, and you may have parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles, or maybe even yourself, where you can take parts of plants and actually make a clone of it by growing it in a different area. And then budding. And so hydra, this is a marine animal. It actually has an exact copy of itself that kind of splits off of it, starts growing on it and then splits off. Yeast also reproduce through budding. In asexual reproduction, you see this process different in males and females. Again, I'm sorry about this one here. In females, it's called oogenesis. And there's an egg and 3 polar bodies that are formed. The egg's a lot bigger. It's the only one that's viable, or the only one that could be fertilized. The polar bodies get reabsorbed. And spermatogenesis, 4 viable sperm or haploid sperm are produced. The process of meiosis, I'm actually going to go through in the next activity or the previous activity with the phases. So I'll do that after, but you can go ahead and check your answers from this, and then we'll look at the other activity 6.18 to look at these phases in more detail to make that easier for you. So pause and check your answers to this, as well as, let me scroll up a little bit, as well as your vocabulary, if you'll pause and then move on. Okay, now we're looking at 6.18 and looking at the phases. So we're going to start with interphase. And in interphase, there's going to be 2 different ones. And I want you to notice in the difference here, there's a lot more DNA here. And we're going to start out with a diploid cell in meiosis. So that's how I know that's the correct one. And actually, if we look at that compared to this, then notice that this has 2 of them. So we're actually going to start with this one because it's the biggest. And so that's interphase. You're not going to have to know that much detail, but just so some of you that were a little bit concerned about that and wrote me questions. Now, here are the first phases. Notice we still have PMAT, but there's a 1 behind each of the first ones. We know that this is prophase 1 because notice how they're intertwined and crossing over is happening. We know this is metaphase 1 because they're in the middle. And anaphase 1, notice the entire X is being pulled to either side. In telophase 1, we have our chromosomes our cells starting to split. And then I want you to notice that everything that happens in the last phase, the reason I said you had to copy them is that you're going to have 2 of every